So we're going to be talking about music, and what we can learn about software and project management, and especially taking on projects in software, with and what we can learn from music and the way music is created about it. This is interesting because I can only see a couple faces, so we're going to be listening to some stuff. And I'm going to be asking you to kind of listen closely to a few things. And I know that's probably very different from what you're typically used to in a technical conference. But hopefully it'll be worth it. And hopefully diving into a little bit of art and a little bit of appreciation will be fun for you. So if you have some headphones, I might suggest putting the headphones on. It'll be easier to hear some things. And we're going to be talking a lot about jazz, especially. So I know jazz isn't everyone's cup of tea, but I just ask, maybe it's not quite your thing, but I think what we'll be listening to is still pretty universally likable, if that makes sense. So there's crazy jazz out there, and then there's pretty approachable jazz. This is more on the approachable side. And even if you don't like, I'd ask you to get past more of the do you like this genre of music kind of thing, and think and what we're really going to be talking about is the art and the organization and the way that some of these musicians get together and create something pretty fabulous. All right, so okay, getting organized here. You might be thinking that music has nothing to do with code, right? And I was kind of talking about this just a second ago, but apart from the fact that music has all kinds of interesting mathematical foundations, such as, music and tones are frequencies and harmonies, like two notes. A harmony is two notes played together, right? The reason those sound good together is because their frequencies become multiples of each other, and it's you can describe that with mathematics. I won't get into that detail right now. But then also music is time divided. All music, you may have heard of time signatures like 4/4 or 3/4, but basically you have a beat progressing, and all notes are divided within that beat in a pretty mathematical kind of way. And there's a lot of kind of, I guess, what I would think of as science or math, or what we tend to like about software, at least I like about software, is the fact that in the end a computer is just a dumb machine, and it does what you tell it to. And even when it's not doing what you think you're telling it to, there's a reason for that, and you can uncover that, right? That there's some of that element to music, right? It's supposed to fit together, and you learn how it fits together, and then you get some some interesting things out of it. So I don't know, maybe I'm stretching a little bit with that analogy, but I think there's some similarities there. But even beyond that, what we're going to dive into is some talking about jazz, and specifically improvisation. You probably all know that improvisation is kind of a hallmark of the jazz style, and depending on what jazz style there might be one more or less degrees of improvisation, but it's there in all forms of jazz, whether it be a big band and then soloists taking turns making stuff up on the fly. But in the end, what we mean by improvisation is a musician getting up and on the fly making up a melody, making up notes. Later we'll realize that it's not actually quite making it up out of the blue, but they're creating something out of the environment of the musicians they're playing with, the feeling and the emotion that's around them. And we're going to dig into how they accomplish that, because it's a pretty amazing thing to do on the fly. All right, so one person and album we're especially going to look into is Miles Davis, and to understand, and specifically his Kind of Blue album. Now, Miles Davis is one of the most known jazz musicians, and he's also, and Kind of Blue is ranked on like all the lists of best jazz albums out there as number one. So he's kind of a giant in that world. So he's a trumpet player. That's him on the album cover there. He a trumpet player and a band leader. He had an extremely long career from 1944 when he first kind of started playing with a combo to 1991, and he was active almost every year playing some kind of music. He continuously reinvented himself, and that's kind of an important concept here. He started playing what a sub genre, you can say, of jazz called bebop. He moved on to what, these are subgenres. You don't have to, maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't, but he kind of reinvented himself. They called it hard bop, which is like hard bop is like crazy fast. Just like people who play that are crazy chops, right? And then this Kind of Blue album, it was out of the blue, stupid pun, right? It's the first album that they kind of called cool jazz, or sorry, modal jazz. Sorry, he also had played cool jazz, but modal jazz, right? He was the first one to explore this kind of genre of music, and instead of being fast and quick and just virtuosic like runs up and down, this is a really different style of just really open, really kind of chill, and anyway, we're going to listen to some of it in a few minutes. And then he went on from this. This was in, I think, I should have written that down. I think it was 61, maybe, that this album came out. But he went on to play, then the styles of what people were listening to changed. It started to move more to rock and roll. So he moved on to playing fusion jazz. He collaborated with rock musicians like Prince and Toto. And through all of this, he was playing with the top musicians of his day all over the place. And, I'm going to run through a quick list of just some of the people who either got their start with Miles Davis or who joined forces with Miles Davis because he was that big of a name. And you won't know all of these names, but I guarantee you'll recognize some of them. And they're all, it's like Miles Davis is this hub of activity, of creative activity. So there's John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Bill Evans, Wayne Shorter, Quincy Jones, Thelonious Monk, Milt Jackson, Sonny Rollins, Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Chick Corea. Those are like all these super heavy hitters in the jazz world. And yeah, it's just crazy how dominant this creative force of Miles Davis was. So this album, let's kind of dive into this album a little bit and what he was going for in this, because we're going to learn from that. This album was made with John Coltrane. That's one of the most, you should know that name, right? He's this tenor saxophone player. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the tenor player over here on the right. Cannonball Adderley, another one of the most famous saxophonists. Bill Evans, who went on from this combo to be one of the most popular jazz pianists, and Jimmy Cobb, like a famous drummer. Like these guys have been playing together for the most part for a few years. So he's got like I was going to say rock stars, jazz stars, whatever. He's got like the top of the cream of the crop here that he's playing with when he went in to make this album. And he wanted to do something completely different. Remember, jazz is based on improvisation, and jazz is constantly looking for something new, something innovative, right? And that's kind of the point of it. They want to find something new and interesting, and so when Miles had some ideas going into this recording session, but he didn't tell any of these guys anything about it. I believe it was a couple of days before, or maybe even the day before, he gave them a couple of notes about, like, from what I've read and what is said, it's kind of vague, but like, if any of you have music experience, a couple of scales and like some pieces of melodies, right? That was it. That's all they had before walking into a recording session. And so what they do is they got into this recording session. The entire album was recorded in only 9 hours on 2 days, right? If you know anything about the way albums are recorded these days, it's, hours and hours and hours and weeks weeks or even months in a studio. This was 9 hours of recording, right? So when he would decide to start recording a song, he would give them a little bit of instruction at that point about how the actual format of the song would go. I'm guessing they probably got, a lead sheet. We're going to look at one in just a minute. And they hit record and they started playing. They started playing they recorded the very first take. I don't think they ever, there's a kind of some uh, claims out there that some of these songs on the album were the first take. And I actually, that's not true, but like it's the second or third take on these songs. They didn't go play it over and over and over. They didn't go track, modern recording machines allow you to go record a track at a time, go fix an instrument, go fix a flub here and there. There was none of that. It was everyone playing all at once, 3 microphones, and like the third or fourth take of a song was what made it onto the album. So he's, the key here though that I'm trying to make is one, that Miles Davis is this creative, genius trying to extract new stuff all the time and new and innovative, interesting things, right? And one of the connections I want to make from this talk is that we are all trying to be innovative, right? We're all trying to look for what is that new tweak, what can we do in our work to make our production, our software unique in a way that it's going to, whatever your end product might be, it's going to serve somebody in a unique way and please them, right? So that they use your product, so that they buy more, so that you entice them. Well, that's the same. This is maybe an artistic, a strictly artistic effort to be innovative and find something new. But like, that's exactly what the whole tech industry is about, right? Where every startup that's out there, that whole industry, everyone's looking for what's the new thing, what's the new innovative idea that's gonna take the world. Let's how did he do this, right? We've talked about this a little bit. He didn't. Man, I thought I had these in a slightly different order, but hang on. Okay, sorry for the presentation flip there. So just to review a little bit more, we've talked about how these musicians weren't prepared in a sense for this recording session. But it's not like they came in and it was magic. It's not like they were some, angels came down or whatever, or Martians or aliens and said, all right, now you have this amazing power to just out of the blue invent something, right? There was still a framework. There was still something, Miles gave them a hint. And then the day of, he gave them what's called a lead sheet. I'm guessing, I actually haven't found that out, but I'm pretty sure he gave them some sort of idea of what the chord progression would be. So there's a framework, and then there's preparation. These guys are highly accomplished, virtuosic musicians in their own right. They know how to play jazz, right? They're extremely creative on their own. And then they're extremely committed to this innovation. They're all on the same page. They're all wanting to find something new, to invent something new, and to explore. And in doing so, they're embracing risk. It might go wrong. Something might happen because not everything's planned out. Last one is teamwork. I mentioned how closely these guys had worked for a few years, right? And that influenced what came out of it. We're going to focus a little bit on each one of these principles through the rest of the presentation. Oops. Okay, so another way of getting some context for what they're doing here. On the right, you see what's called a symphony score, right? This is just the first page of a symphony. So imagine, a symphony has orchestra, horns. Sometimes they even have choirs. It could be hundreds of people performing. But these are all the instruments. I think this is in German, so it's a little bit different, but all the instruments down the left side that happen to at least be playing right now in the symphony, and all their parts explicitly written out, exactly what they're going to play, right? And this is only the first page. Symphony scores can be hundreds of pages long, or, at least 50 to 100 pages of just, because you have to see all of the instruments at the same time. We're only seeing like 4 measures of music right here, right? So it goes on, and every note is meticulously written out for what they should play. In contrast, jazz is usually played with either no music at all or what's called a lead sheet. So this lead sheet here, all it does is give you a melody, and look at this melody. It's it's extremely simple, right? It's like, you know, these half notes and two notes, you know. It's a variation of a 12-bar blues, if that means anything to you. And you get a vague tempo up here of medium blues. That's it, right? This is something like maybe what Miles Davis might have given them on that day. Maybe it probably looser than this, in fact, right? So let's take a listen to what came out of this, because you might look at this and say, oh, like, you know, a beginner piano player or an instrument player of any kind could play that, right? Which, you know, they could play the melody. But let's take a quick listen to what came out of this. And because we don't have all the time in the world, I'm going to jump a little bit further into this. So what you're going to hear is kind of, one other thing. The way jazz musicians typically play through a song like this is someone will play the melody, they call it playing the head, through one time, and that kind of sets the tone and the feeling for the song. And then they'll start taking solos. They basically repeat this pattern over and over and over. And remember, I said there was a framework. It's not like they're just inventing it out of nothing. They have to adhere to this framework in order for them to stay together, to be playing with each other. So after the head is played or the melody is played once, then usually that same musician that played the head will start soloing and improvising, and then they'll take turns improvising through all the different instruments until they kind of feel like they're done. Anyway, this Freddie Freeloader is one of the songs on the Kind of Blue album, and it is 9 minutes long, but it's 9 minutes based on only this framework. And sorry, let's get to the point and we'll take a little listen. And I'm really hoping this works. I was kind of planning on, I'm just realizing I think I need to share my, hang on just a minute. Okay, I'm going to start playing. If you guys don't hear it, I think I'll know it's. Those of you with your camera on, put a thumbs up if you can hear this. All right, let me. I might have to reshare my screen. Hang on. Okay, it says I'm sharing audio. It should. Is that working now? Ah, sweet. Okay. Hallelujah. Because this would really suck if I had to like try to mic it or something. Okay. So yeah, again, we're coming in on the end of the melody here. And just relax and take a listen. So Bill Evans here, he's making this up on the fly. He didn't rehearse this beforehand. This might be his second or third time playing this song ever. All right, I'd love to just listen to that whole thing. Personally, I love it, but I think I think you get the point, right? Like this simple framework led to that. And not only that, but first the piano player solos and Miles solos and all the saxes solos. And if we had time to listen through the whole thing, it builds, there's ebbs and flows, there's energy building, when a musician gets sort of more energy behind what he's doing, the whole band will follow. And it's just this kind of ebb and flow of energy and creativity. Okay, I can't click on the, got to figure out how to change slides when that's on there. All right. Next time I present on Gather, I'll have this all figured out. yeah, it's, oh, and I sure hope that went into the Zoom too. I think it did. Anyway, on we go. Okay, so a couple of quotes here. Let's talk a little bit more about how they're pulling this off, right? So a quote from Miles Davis. I love this quote. It's not about standing still and becoming safe. If anybody wants to keep creating, they have to be about change. Now, I want to take a minute and talk about that change that he's meaning there, right? So, how many change cliche quotes can you come up with? The only constant is change. I don't know. It seems like there's just a million businessy kind of quotes out there about that. One of my favorites is, the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. That's from Albert Einstein. I think that's pretty profound. Anyway, what industry changes faster than tech and software? Not only like the technology, the software, the frameworks that we use, which are changing and adapting all the time, but the business environment which we're working in is always changing. And what might be a perfectly good strategy 1 month, only a few months later might, a new competitor arrives, or the circumstances change, and all of a sudden we're having to adapt and do something different. So this is where I think the connection between improvisation and jazz and what we do as software engineers and technologists starts to get really interesting. Because what can we learn? These musicians had, they were prepared, but they didn't know what they were going to perform, right? They didn't have a strict thought out plan. They didn't have, you can think of it as, let's compare it to waterfall maybe, right? And there's a whole nother, I don't have time to diverge into this, but there's an interesting kind of comparison between symphonies and waterfall and maybe perhaps and that kind of thing. But anyway, like if you spend all this time meticulously planning exactly how you're going to execute something, it's guaranteed to fail in a sense, right? Because the circumstances will change by the time you get partway through that plan. So what jazz musicians say is that you're better off with a loose framework and then dive in, go, and figure it out as you go. So another great quote over here, always plan for the fact that no plan ever goes according to plan, right? Like it's better off recognizing that everything's going to change. I want to talk a little bit about this Frank Barrett quote down here: minimal structure, maximum autonomy. Frank Barrett is a business professor who actually he's an accomplished jazz pianist as well. And he actually kind of wrote a book about very similar topics. And I didn't find it until after I started, but anyway, super interesting. He kind of more connects it to strictly business rather than software, but really interesting ideas that he presents there. He talks about how traditional companies want command and control, right? They have everything strictly, their processes strictly enforced. They don't want anybody trying to change those processes, right? There's not a lot of confidence. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, right? But there are companies out there like that. So they don't trust their employees. They basically stifle creativity by wanting everything meticulously planned. And companies who stick with that too long, they get disrupted. And so that's something we can take from these jazz musicians, right? They know they're embracing that change. They're embracing the unknown, and then preparing themselves and practicing dealing with that unknown, and actually trying to make something interesting out of it. In fact, you know, jazz musicians make mistakes. There's plenty of mistakes made. They know there's no way you can not make a mistake if you're trying to invent melodies and things out of the blue. One famous one is Ella Fitzgerald, who's a jazz singer. She was singing a song called Mac the Knife in a concert, and she forgot the words. Like, that happens, right? So instead of stopping and panicking or anything, she started making up words. Or, like, you probably heard of scatting, which is where jazz singers kind of solo by, making up syllables and stuff like that. So she half scatted, half made up words. On the fly, she started singing lyrics about other jazz musicians. At one point, she started singing about how her fellas, meaning her other bandmates, had made a wreck out of the song. That was like the last phrase. I mean, she made that up on the fly. Well, it turns out that recording of that concert was published in an album, and she won a Grammy for it. Right? So, and the audience just loved it, because not only did she, she forgot the words, but then she made something unique and an awesome out of it by using her fantastic talents to go somewhere that they never planned on going, right? So they embraced that risk, that possibility that things might not go as planned, but were prepared to go in a creative direction where things might take them. All right, so bringing things back together in terms of this is kind of all on that framework theme, right? So my recommendation, or what I take from this, is when we plan our activities, when we plan our projects, we shouldn't overplan. We should have a vision, but not try to detail every little nitty-gritty detail, especially if we're leading a team. We need to embrace the creativity and the talents of that team and let them be involved in realizing that vision. Yeah. Okay, so we talked a little bit about embracing risk already. Yeah, after you have that framework of a plan, you have to accept the fact that because it's a framework and it's not detailed, there's risk. Something's going to go awry, right? And you have to be okay with that. You have to and allow that, and it has to be safe, right? Miles Davis said, do not fear mistakes. There are none. I mean, he was pretty extreme about this. I found a lot of Miles Davis is, and you just read about him. He's an extremely fascinating character. But then another quote from Frank Barrett, which is talking about how jazz players court disaster. They actually are seeking to be in a little bit of an anxious place, to be a little bit uncomfortable. Because if you're uncomfortable, that's the zone in which the innovation comes, doing something different, not being exactly sure what's coming next. It kind of forces the creativity and the innovation to come out of it. So you really have to seek out that risk and embrace it, and not be obsessed with perfection. A couple examples in the business world and technology world. I would argue that the first iPhone was not perfect. There's all kinds of writing out there about how it was missing features that really could have been in that first iPhone. They weren't prevented by the technology at the time. So I'd argue that it wasn't perfect, but it's massively successful, right? Because it got the right qualities together. Netflix is another company who has reinvented itself multiple times, and has taken a lot of risk in doing so. Again, long talks could be talked about that, but all right. So continuing to talk about mistakes, we have another example here. This example is, again, one of the songs on the Kind of Blue album called So What? And on this take, again, it was like second or third time through. Remember, this group had been playing together for some time, and they were used to playing a style called hard bop, which is just like you know, think of like, I don't know, heavy metal or something, but a jazz version, right? It's fast, it's intense, it's, you know, lots of notes, and this album is chill all of a sudden, right? So there's an intro to So What. It's pretty chill. There's a bass part going on, and then all of a sudden you get into the solos, and you know, this is actually written up. This is you know, counted by Jimmy Cobb and stuff, and there's recordings of the group actually in the you know, they recorded all of this, so talking about this and whatever. But so when they get out of they're transitioning from the head to the solo section, and Jimmy Cobb is like, it's kind of like a reflex, right? He's like, all right, here we go into the solo section, and he's used to hard bop, and he hits this cymbal crash that's just out of context, right? For what the kind of chill groove of the song. But Miles Davis didn't stop it. They didn't stop and restart, you know, as you might in a recording session to keep it perfect. He's just like, nah, you didn't stop anything. They just went on with it. And then that became the version that went on the album. And we're going to listen to it right now. And I don't know, I wish this was a little more interactive, because I'm really curious what you guys will kind of think of this. So I'm going to jump ahead. There's a really long intro section. Okay, 116 is where we need to go. I tried to get these linked in so they'd start in the right place, but that wasn't happening. So did you hear it? Hopefully you heard it. Now, it's interesting to hear that, because it's awesome. Like, we're gonna play this again, and it's this transition. It like sets the stage for Miles' solo. But a perfectionist, somebody who is trying to be a perfectionist in the studio, would have said, "Oh, that doesn't fit what the song's going after." But that was the attitude of Miles Davis in the session. You hear it ring out and just kind of establish this new feel to the song. That's all created, you know. That the band hadn't planned that out. It just happened, and it was beautiful. All right, another quick little thing. There's in Miles's solo on the same track, he makes, you know, like kind of a beginner trumpet player flub of some kind of squeaky notes. But he didn't re-record it. It's all in kind of, you know, it's all in kind of the feel here. So we'll take a listen to that. Oh, sorry, I started the wrong place. Here we go. Did you hear it? The cracking that he did right there. You know, but in the grand scheme of things, like it's just part of the creation. It's just part of the search. And as you're listening to the whole song, you don't even think about that or say, oh man, what a bad trumpet player, he just cracks that note. Well, no, he's experimenting. He's trying to find something new. And in fact, this trumpet solo is like, jazz musicians are always, you know, one of the ways jazz musicians try to learn to improvise is they, you know, you got to learn some licks, right? So one thing you do is you transcribe a solo and play it, and so you kind of start to kind of get some of the ideas of other solo musicians. But anyway, hugely famous solo, and it was all improvised, and has a mistake right in the middle of it. All right, you're getting the point. All right, it does weird things if I click or hit an arrow button. Sorry about the transition there. So you might be saying, all right, so bugs are mistakes, right? And Miles Davis says there's no mistakes and that we ought to embrace them. So therefore, there are no bugs, right? No bugs. Just ignore them. Just to keep on rolling. Just keep on going. And that's not what we're meaning, right? Obviously not. But what is the parallel here? How do we learn? So how can we take this into our software and our team experiences? And the point here is that that we make it okay to make mistakes, right? That's the point. Is we're more interested in progress and working as a team as being creative and achieving than we are worried about the mistakes or the bugs. Or even to think about it more broadly, sometimes you go off creating a feature and it turns out nobody wants the feature or something. And like, what are you going to do? Well, you move on. You sometimes that's going to happen. And don't waste time overthinking why or what, or being so worried about making a mistake or building the perfect feature that you basically halt your progress on anything. I think it was Google that had the concept or value of fail fast. I think that kind of applies here, right? That mistake that Miles made in the middle of his solo, it didn't break his flow. It didn't break, he didn't like, you don't hear him like make a pause maybe afterwards or something. The song keeps going. The band's going to go no matter what. They're not stopping. So he just keeps right on going, right? I think we can learn something from that and adapt something to that to our work. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about preparation. So I mentioned some of this before, like you can't just get a bunch of musicians in a room and say, make some jazz, right? There's preparation both on the, maybe on the leader side. We talk about the framework that you have to have, but personal preparation has to happen as well. You've got to have the musicians who are ready to improvise, who have the knowledge and the skills they need to adapt to the changes that are coming. So again, talking about the musicians who are in this group, Miles Davis or any jazz group, they've practiced for a long time. One of the ironies of improvisation is that it's, in a sense, it's not like these musicians are drawing from licks and patterns and things that they've practiced. They're not necessarily thinking about what they're doing. They're feeling it, but it's drawing from stuff they've played before, and they can do it because they've practiced that, right? So it's kind of irony here. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg maybe kind of thing. Another thing that's really popular, jazz musicians all the time they call it quoting other melodies. They'll fit a melody from a jazz standard or something into a solo they're playing in a completely different time, completely different song. Maybe they'll change it up a little bit to fit, the harmonies at the time. One fun thing to do is to listen to jazz and kind of try and pick out what they might be quoting from. So they're reforming and recreating, right? They're not inventing out of nothing. And that's kind of the point I want us to take from that, is that, okay, so if we're trying to adapt to change, we're trying to be innovative, and we want to embrace mistakes and have a loose framework. Well, then what are we going on? Well, we're drawing on our experience. It's not that we, if you've been thinking about software tools and frameworks that we use, it doesn't mean we go reject Ruby or Rails or something or Solidus because, we're going to go improvise our own. No, we're drawing on those things and the tools that we have access to build something innovative and new. We're building from the tools and the things that we have at hand. All right, now I want to talk a little bit more about the team, right? This is another really important thing I think we can take away from jazz. For jazz musicians and combos and bands to achieve this high level of innovation, they have to have fantastic relationships. They've got to trust each other and have chemistry and communicate. So couple of examples that I want to take from this. So Dave Brubeck is another really famous jazz musician. He's a piano player. This album, Take Five, is another one of the most popular jazz albums. And there's a song on there called, Time Out is the album. Take Five is a song. But Take Five is a really popular song. It's interesting because it's in 5/4, which means, most songs are 4/4 is in they have a feel of 4 beats at a time, or 3, like 3 is like a waltz, for example, has a waltz feel. This is built on groups of 5 notes, so again, trying something new, experimenting with something different. And I want to talk about knowing your role here. So the bass player and the pianist in this, it starts out normally, I talked about this, you play through the head. The saxophonist takes the head or the melody, and then he does a solo. But the solos all take place over the same chords. And the pianist and the bass player, because it's only the sax and the drums that get a solo here, the pianist and the bass player end up repeating this pattern, especially the bass player. It's 3 notes. And he basically plays 3 notes for, I forget how long the song is, for like 6 minutes in the same rhythm and droning on. Now, if you're that, and I play bass, so I especially can relate to this, right? So if you're that bass player, you think, oh man, this sucks. I don't want to play this. I don't even want to be involved with this, because it's only 3 notes. I don't get my chance to shine. Well, of course you don't take that approach. As a member of this band who has a chemistry and a trust of the other members, you see the vision of the end result of what you're trying to create together. And in this case, for this song, his role, that bass player's role and the pianist's role, is to support the other musicians and to be the best possible support that he can. And it might be 3 notes, but only this bass player can play those 3 notes that consistently, with that feel, locked into the rhythm with the drummer and the pianist, and create that feel and that foundation for the solos that are going on over the top. So we're talking about commitment and being willing to play your role. So let's take a listen to this, and then we'll kind of relate it to our work on software teams. I'll look at my notes here to figure out where to jump into. 1 minute 50. Actually, I'm going to jump to the. You hear the 3 notes that the bass player is playing? This is the bridge, which is only played a couple of times. So this is different than the 3 notes. Okay, now the sax player is soloing here. And from here until 4:21, the bass player plays this pattern. And the piano player plays basically the same pattern as well. So here's the drum solo. Bass player is still doing the same thing, right? Here it is a couple minutes later. He's still doing the same thing. Now you might ask yourself, is that bass player bored? He's been playing that for a couple minutes now. No, he's not bored. He's listening to what's going on in the band, and he's committed to supporting what's going on and to that output of the group as a whole. And that's happened to be his role for this song. A good friend of mine that I played, a drummer, who became a man. I have so much respect for people who teach high school music, but he had a saying that he would say. He said, "You got for any band, you got to know what is going on, right? What is the focus of what your band is playing? And if you're not it, as in if you're not the focus, if you're not the thing that is the focus of that tune at that time, then you better get out of the way." And I love that quote because musicians get excited, they get prideful of their own skills. I played with a guitarist once, and great guy, love him to death, but man, he was just permanently soloing. He just never backed off. He was and he was always loud, and man, I love him, and he was great, but he didn't know how to sit back and support the other members of the team when he needed to. All right, so know your role and be okay with your role, because some other time it's going to be your time to shine, right? The same bass player on another track is soloing and playing his head off, right? That's okay. You support each other, and man, it's so easy to accidentally play these. There's this thing popping up over the button. All right, another example of supporting your team members is in this album. Ray Brown is a really famous jazz bassist and is an idol of mine, so that's kind of why I picked this one. But in this song, there's a transition to a guitar solo, and the pianist and so Andre Previn, the pianist, and the guitarist. It's a guitarist's turn to solo, but the pianist is listening and reacting to what the guitarist is doing, and at this point, he even starts to reflect back what the guitarist is playing on the. Remember, this is all improvised, right? Reflect back what the guitarist is playing to him. And I got to get to the right time. It's 2:15. Okay, here's a guitar solo. Hear that? Just started copying him there. All right, I wish I could play these over and over, and I have no idea how this is going over with you. Maybe you guys are all rolling your eyes at me, kind of geeking out on this stuff. Hopefully not. But anyway, notice that the first of that solo too, the pianist dropped out completely for a while. He didn't play anything. You just let the guitarist get going, and then he kind of hit a few chords here in between. And there's this communication, this nonverbal communication going on with these musicians that is intense. They're not reading from music. They're listening to each other, and they're reacting to each other. And they're trying to follow the energy and the performance of each other without ever saying a word. One of my, I don't know, proudest moments as a musician was playing a gig. We played a bunch of weddings and sometimes in some restaurants, and those are the best kinds of gigs because no one's listening to you, really. You're the background music. And so we would get really, really experimental, and sometimes we'd crash and burn, talking about taking risks again, right? But people wouldn't even really notice that we crashed, or we'd recover quickly. And in this one gig, we were playing a song called "My Funny Valentine," which is a ballad. And somebody had taken solos a couple times through, and for whatever reason, the energy wasn't quite there. And like, we need to pick this up a little bit. And I was looking over at the drummer, and we played together a lot. And the drummer and bass player kind of have a lot of power to take the, if they start playing something different, everybody's got to follow along. So I can't remember which one of us started doing it, but this is a swing ballad. And at the end of one of the solos, there was kind of some nonverbal cues and the way changing the rhythms. And we were able to transition the whole band to playing "My Funny Valentine" in a Latin jazz style, which is, I wish I could play examples of this, but all of a sudden we go from swing to like think of, I'm trying to think of a common, if you've heard the song Girl from Ipanema or something like that. Anyway, and then all of a sudden everybody, the other players, the soloists, they hooked on to that energy and they're like, oh yeah, this is cool. And off we went to somewhere we had no idea we were going to go. And it was one of the, super awesome experience. Anyway, we are going long on time. So good thing I'm on my last slide. So, I want to use this Agile Manifesto slide to kind of sum up some of this, right? Hopefully it's coming across the connections. But one of the things as I was writing this up and thinking through this, I've been thinking through this concept and using these and, here and there for a couple of years now, but especially in the last couple of days, as I was trying to put this actual presentation together, the connections to the Agile Manifesto started, it's amazing how similar these ideas are to the ideas that I've been trying to talk about and connect here. So going through each of, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, right? In other words, we've talked about don't over planning, have a framework, but don't worry about the nitty gritty details immediately, and instead depend on your relationships and trust each other and support each other, right? Know what your role is. To me, those are individuals and interactions. The next one is working software over comprehensive documentation. So again, take a risk. Don't plan too much because it's going to change, and embrace the opportunity to innovate, right? So focus on the product and the feel of the product and the result, rather than, process and nitty-gritty details. Maybe that one's a little bit of a stretch, but customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Again, trusting those who you work with, embracing and looking for that opportunity to innovate with them, and then responding to change. That's one of the biggest things I've talked about through all of this, is the ability of somebody who's a capable improviser to respond to change, which is the constant through all of our lives, all of our business activities, and our jobs. Basically, if I were to sum all of this up with one or two sentences, it would be that learning how to improvise allows you to better cope with the changes that will inevitably come. If I were to keep going, maybe a follow-up presentation or something, I think it'd be really interesting to talk about how you learn to improvise in the context of a software team. But maybe that's something for you to think about. And how do you develop that muscle in your teams, to value the freedom and the autonomy to take risks, to make mistakes, but to recover quickly. So that's my talk. It's been a pleasure to be here. I wish I could see all your faces and everything, but maybe I'll, come talk to me later in the conference. And yeah, take care, everybody. Oh, one last thing, I have to make a plug. I should have put a link on my presentation, but I work for a company called Maxwell. And if you'll allow me to just say, hey, we're hiring, and come talk to me if you're interested in working in Ruby on Rails for a company that's doing really innovative stuff and honestly values some of the concepts that I've been talking about today. So that's it.